Victor Moretti had ordered men killed for less than what she just said to him. The entire room went still, 12 of the most dangerous men in Chicago, all of them watching a waitress stand her ground with her chin up and her hands steady. She hadn't flinched, she hadn't apologized. She had answered him wrong, and she had done it on purpose. If you've ever watched someone walk straight into fire without blinking, you know exactly what that looks like. Subscribe to the channel, follow this story to the very end, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The night it all unraveled started with a question nobody expected Victor Moretti to ask twice. He was not a man who repeated himself. Everyone in Chicago, from the alderman who cashed his envelopes to the priest who heard his confession, understood that asking Victor Moretti to say something again was its own kind of death wish. He spoke once. You listened. That was the arrangement, and it had held for 23 years without interruption. Until her. She was standing at the corner of the long mahogany bar inside the Meridian, a private jazz club that did not appear on any city map, did not hold a liquor license under its real name, and did not admit guests without a personal invitation from someone Victor trusted. The woman behind the bar wore a white blouse, black slacks, and a small silver pin on her collar that identified her as staff. Her hair was pulled back. Her face was calm. She had been pouring drinks for 3 hours and had not spilled a drop. Victor had been watching her for 40 minutes before he spoke. What's your name? He asked. Emily, she said. Emily what? Carter. He looked at her for a long moment. How long you been working here? Emily Carter. 6 weeks, she said. He nodded slowly. Then he said, I asked you a question earlier tonight about the Collins delivery. You told Ronnie you didn't know anything about it. She kept her eyes on the glass she was polishing. That's right. I'm asking you again, Victor said. What do you know about the Collins delivery? The room did not go quiet. It had already been quiet, but something shifted in the quality of that silence the way it shifts before a storm changes direction. 2 of Victor's men who had been standing near the back wall straightened almost imperceptibly. A heavy-set man named Frank Caruso, who handled Victor's logistics and had not moved from his bar stool in an hour, slowly set down his drink. Emily Carter looked up from the glass. I know it didn't arrive, she said, and I know you already know why. Nobody breathed. Victor Moretti tilted his head exactly 1 inch to the left. It was the only tell he had, and the men in that room had spent years learning to recognize it. It meant he was deciding something. It meant the next 30 seconds were going to define what happened to everyone in the room for a very long time. Say that again, he said. She said it again. Not louder, not softer, exactly the same. Frank Caruso stood up from the bar stool so fast it scraped backward across the floor. One of the men near the wall, a younger guy named Mateo who had been with Victor for 4 years and had never once seen anyone talk to him this way, put his hand inside his jacket. Victor held up 2 fingers without looking at either of them. Both men stopped. Victor walked to the bar. He moved the way he always moved, unhurried, deliberate, like a man who had never once in his adult life needed to rush toward anything. He put both hands flat on the mahogany surface and leaned forward until there were maybe 18 inches between his face and hers. Who sent you? He said. Nobody sent me, Emily said. That's not an answer. It's the only honest one I've got. He studied her face. Victor Moretti had spent 4 decades reading people. It was the skill that had kept him alive longer than anyone predicted. Longer than 3 federal investigations, 2 attempted coups inside his own organization, and 1 very serious car bomb in 2009. He could feel when someone was lying to him the way other people felt weather changes in their knees. It was physical, a kind of low-grade vibration in his chest that told him something was wrong. He didn't feel it now. What he felt instead was something he hadn't experienced in so long, he almost didn't recognize it. Uncertainty. You're not scared, he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was more like an observation, something said out loud, because saying it made it more real, made it something he could examine. No, she said. Most people are scared of me. I know. That doesn't concern you. She set the glass down on the bar very carefully. Mr. Moretti, she said. I've already lost everything I was afraid of losing. You don't have a lot of leverage with a person like that. Frank Caruso said Victor, and Victor silenced him with a look. He straightened up. He pulled a bar stool out from under the bar and sat down across from her, like a man settling in for a conversation he hadn't planned, but suddenly found interesting. Tell me about the Collins delivery, he said. She looked at him for a moment, Then she reached under the bar and brought out a glass and poured 2 fingers of bourbon into it and set it in front of him. She didn't pour one for herself. 47 containers came through the Calumet terminal last Tuesday, she said. 46 cleared inspection. The 47th didn't. I know that. Container 404, she said. Something happened in Victor's face. It was barely there, a tightening around the eyes, a shift in the set of his dark bureau, but it happened, and she watched it happen. Container 404 was flagged, she said, but not by customs. The flag came from inside your organization. Someone on your end made a call that stopped it before it ever reached the inspection point. That's not a delivery that didn't arrive, Mr. Moretti. That's a delivery that was deliberately intercepted. Matteo had drifted closer. Frank Caruso had not sat back down. 3 more men had materialized from the back of the club, positioning themselves with the casual, practiced ease of people doing something they had done many times before. Victor had not moved. You know an awful lot about my business, he said. I know everything about your business, she said. That's why I'm here. And why are you here? She looked at him steadily. Because whoever pulled that container off the manifest is going to do it again. And next time there won't be anyone left to stop it. Frank Caruso stepped forward then. That's enough, he said. He wasn't talking to her. He was talking to Victor. Whatever this is, it's done. She goes, we figure out how she got this information and Frank, Victor's voice was so quiet it was almost inaudible. Sit down. Frank Caruso looked like he wanted to say something else. He didn't. He sat down. Victor looked at Emily Carter. You said container 404 was intercepted by someone inside my organization, he said. Who? I don't know yet, she said. Then what exactly are you here to offer me? Evidence, she said. I have documentation. Manifest wire transfers, call logs, 6 months of it, everything up to and including last Tuesday. Documentation of what? She held his gaze. Of what was in that container, Mr. Moretti, and of who knew about it. The jazz quartet in the back of the room was still playing a slow, low piece that nobody in the room was hearing anymore. Victor picked up the glass of bourbon she'd poured for him. He didn't drink it. He just turned it slowly in his hand. If you have what you say you have, he said, why are you here? Why not go to the FBI? Why not go to the press? Because the FBI already knows, she said. The room absorbed that. And the press, she said, doesn't understand what they'd be looking at. Not yet. But I would, J.M. Yes. Because it's my organization. Because it's your name on everything, she said. And because whoever is using your infrastructure doesn't care what happens to you when this comes out. They're already planning to let you take the fall. Victor set the glass down. You're telling me I'm being set up. I'm telling you you've already been set up, she said. The question is whether you're going to figure out by who before it's too late. Matteo's hand came back out of his jacket. This is a setup right now, he said. She's working for somebody. She comes in here with this story. She's not working for anybody, Victor said. You can't know that. I know it, Victor said flatly, because if she were working for somebody, she wouldn't be standing here. She'd have sent a lawyer. He looked at her. Wouldn't she? Emily Carter almost smiled. Not quite. Probably, she said. What's in container 404, Victor asked. She didn't answer immediately. She looked at her hands for a moment, and it was the first time all night that she looked like something had cost her something. Not fear. Something heavier than fear. Children, she said. The word landed in the room like a stone dropped into standing water. The ripples went everywhere. Frank Caruso made a sound, not a word, just a sound, and turned away. Matteo's hand dropped from his jacket entirely. 2 of the men near the back of the room exchanged a look that was the first honest thing anyone had done in hours. Victor didn't move for a long time. How many off, he said, and the manifest was altered, she said, but based on the container size and the transport records, at least 20, maybe more. And they were gone, she said, before the flag was pulled. They were already gone. Victor stood up from the bar stool. He walked to the end of the bar and stood with his back to the room and both hands on the wood, and nobody said anything. The quartet finished the slow piece and started another one, and nobody heard that either. Frank Caruso said very quietly, Victor. Victor didn't turn around. Victor, we don't know if any of this is, it's real, Victor said. You can't. It's real, Frank. He turned around. His face had changed, not softened. Victor Moretti's face didn't soften. But something had shifted behind his eyes, something that had been one thing and was now another thing entirely. And it happened through my terminal, through my transport line, through my people. He looked at Emily Carter. Someone in my organization did this. Yes, she said, and you know who. I have a strong suspicion, she said. That's not the same thing. No, she said, but it's a starting point. He walked back to the bar. He leaned forward again, the same 18 inches, the same study of her face. Who are you, he said, and don't tell me Emily Carter, because Emily Carter has a social security number that was issued to a 58-year-old man in Peoria who died in 2019, and I had that checked 40 minutes ago. She didn't react to that, not even a little. My name is Evelyn Blake, she said. Nothing in the room moved. That name means something to you, she said. Victor's jaw tightened. Yes, he said. Then you know why I'm here. Evelyn Blake has been dead for 20 years, Victor said. Almost, she said. Not quite. Frank Caruso had gone pale. That's not possible. You were told what someone needed you to believe, Evelyn said. She wasn't looking at Frank. She was looking at Victor. You were told I was dead because I needed to disappear. And I needed to disappear because I was 17 years old and I had just watched 3 men in your organization murder my mother and I was the only witness. Victor said nothing. I ran, she said. I built a new name, a new life, a new everything. And for 20 years I stayed gone because I told myself it was enough just to survive. She paused. And then last Tuesday, Container 404 got flagged on a transit report I was monitoring for a completely different reason. And when I pulled the details and I saw what was in it, she stopped. Something moved across her face fast and raw and completely unperformed. I realized surviving wasn't enough anymore. The jazz quartet stopped playing. Whether they had heard something, felt something, or simply reached the end of their set list, they stopped and the silence that came in behind it was enormous. Victor Moretti looked at Evelyn Blake for a long time. The men who killed your mother, he said. 2 of them are dead, she said. The 3rd one is still in your organization. Victor looked at Frank Caruso. Frank Caruso looked at the floor. Frank, Victor said. Victor, I swear to God I didn't know what that container. I'm not asking you about the container, Victor said. I'm asking you about a woman named Margaret Blake. 20 years ago, a warehouse on the south side. Frank's mouth opened. Closed. Evelyn watched him with the kind of stillness that only comes from rehearsing a moment in your mind for 2 decades. I was there, Frank said. But it wasn't my call, Victor. It was, whose call was it? Victor said. It was, Frank stopped. He looked at the door. He looked at the men near the back wall. He looked everywhere except at Victor or at Evelyn. I can't, he said. Victor, if I tell you, Frank, if I tell you who ordered it, you're not going to believe me, Frank said. And the people above him? Victor, we are talking about people so far above us that saying their name out loud in this room. Say the name, Victor said. Frank Caruso pressed his lips together. His hands were shaking. Frank Caruso had been in this organization for 31 years, had survived 3 wars, 2 FBI raids and a stint in federal prison, and his hands were shaking. Daniel, he said. Nobody moved. Daniel Cross, Frank said. He ordered it 20 years ago. And the container last Tuesday, Victor, that was Daniel too. The whole thing, the trafficking, the intercept, the flag, Daniel has been running a secondary operation inside your organization for at least 5 years, maybe longer, and he's been doing it with protection from someone very high up, someone with enough juice to keep it buried. Victor turned to look at the back of the room, at the man standing in the shadows near the exit. Daniel Cross had been Victor's most trusted lieutenant for 11 years. He was standing with his hand inside his jacket, and the expression on his face was not the expression of a man who had just been accused of something he didn't do. It was the expression of a man who had just realized his exit was closing. How long have you been standing there? Victor said. Daniel Cross said nothing. Daniel, Victor said, take your hand out of your jacket. Daniel Cross took his hand out of his jacket, but it was not empty when it came out. Evelyn Blake did not run. She did not move backward. She had known the moment she walked into the Meridian tonight that this was one of the possible endings. She had made her peace with it before she ever poured the first drink. But Victor Moretti stepped between her and Daniel Cross. Nobody in the room had expected that, including Victor. He seemed almost surprised by his own movement, like his body had made a decision that his mind was still catching up to. He stood with his back to Evelyn and his eyes on Daniel and his hands completely open. No weapon, no gesture of threat, just a man standing between a gun and a woman he had no logical reason to protect. Put it down, Victor said. Victor, Daniel said, you have no idea what you're protecting. You have no idea who she is or who sent her. I know exactly who she is, Victor said, and I know what you did, and I know about the container. His voice didn't rise. It never rose. And I'm telling you for the last time to put the gun down. Daniel Cross looked at the gun in his hand. He looked at the room around him, 12 men, all of them watching, none of them moving to help him, because not a single one of them had understood until this moment how completely Daniel had been operating outside the rules that governed everything else. Even in a criminal organization, there were rules. And the men in this room, whatever else they were, had believed in those rules. What was in Container 404 was not within those rules. You're going to burn everything, Daniel said. Everything you built. If this comes out, it's already out, Evelyn said from behind Victor. Daniel looked at her, past Victor's shoulder. The documentation I mentioned, she said. It's not just with me. I sent copies to 3 separate locations before I walked in tonight. If I don't make contact by 6 a.m., those copies go to people who will know exactly what to do with them. Daniel Cross lowered the gun, not because he wanted to, because the math had changed, and even in that moment, Daniel Cross was a man who understood math. Victor turned around to face Evelyn. 6 a.m., he said. Yes. That's 4 hours. Yes, she said. That's not much time. She looked at him. I know, she said, but it's what we have. Victor Moretti looked at the woman who had spent 20 years becoming a ghost in order to walk back into his club and dismantle 23 years of his empire in a single night, and something happened in his face that none of the men in the room had ever seen before. Not remorse exactly, not apology, something older than both, something that had been waiting a long time for the right moment to show itself. Your mother, he said, Margaret Blake. Yes, Evelyn said. I didn't order it, he said. I know, she said, but it happened under my name. Yes, she said, it did. Victor nodded slowly. He picked up the glass of bourbon from the bar, the one she had poured, and he had never drunk, and he finished it in one motion. He set the glass down very carefully. All right, he said, tell me everything. From the beginning, all of it. Evelyn Blake, who had not sat down in 4 hours, pulled out a bar stool and sat down. And in the back of the Meridian, with Daniel Cross standing against the wall, surrounded by men who no longer trusted him, and Frank Caruso staring at his own hands like they belonged to someone else, and 12 men trying to recalibrate everything they thought they understood about the organization they worked for. Evelyn began to talk. She talked for a long time, and Victor Moretti listened. For the first time in 23 years, someone in that room was telling him the complete and unedited truth, and it was the most dangerous thing he had ever heard. Evelyn talked for 40 minutes without stopping. Not because she needed to. She had rehearsed this moment so many times in so many rented rooms in so many cities that the words came out with the kind of precision that only comes from years of private repetition. She knew exactly what to say and in what order and how much to give at a time. She had learned a long time ago that information was the only currency that didn't depreciate. Victor listened the way he did everything without interrupting, without reacting visibly, without giving her anything she could use to calibrate whether she was reaching him. He sat with his elbows on the bar and his eyes on her face, and he let her talk. The men around the room listened too. Nobody had been dismissed. Nobody had left. Even Daniel Cross, standing against the wall with Mateo 2 feet to his left and another man named Garrett 2 feet to his right, was listening. He wasn't going to make a move. Evelyn had made sure of that before she ever walked through the door tonight. The copies she'd sent out weren't a bluff. She'd been very careful to make sure they weren't a bluff. She laid it out in sequence. The first container flagged on a false manifest 8 months ago. The wire transfers that looked on the surface like logistics payments, standard industry, language, correct account structures. Nothing that would catch the eye of anyone who wasn't specifically looking. The call logs, which she had obtained through a source she did not name, that connected a burner number to a prepaid line registered to a shell company that traced back after 4 layers of incorporation to a man named Gerald Stokes. Victor's expression didn't change when she said the name, but his right hand, which had been resting flat on the bar, closed into a loose fist. You know that name, she said. I know that name, he said. Then you know he's not. I know exactly what he is, Victor said. He's a sitting United States Senator from the state of Illinois. He's been in office for 16 years. He chairs the subcommittee on interstate commerce and transportation. He paused. He came to my daughter's wedding. The room absorbed that. Frank Caruso made a sound that was not quite a word. He came to your daughter's wedding, Evelyn said carefully, and he has been using your shipping infrastructure to move children across state lines for at least 2 years. Using my infrastructure, Victor said, or using my name. Both, she said, but not with your knowledge. Victor looked at her. How sure are you of that? I'm sure, she said, because if you had known, this conversation would not be happening the way it's happening. That was not a compliment. It was an assessment, and Victor received it as such. Show me the call logs, he said. She reached into the inside of her jacket and produced a folded envelope and set it on the bar. Victor picked it up. He opened it. He read without expression for a long time, turning pages, slowly going back twice to reread sections. The room stayed quiet. The jazz quartet had packed up and gone home. There was no ambient noise left to fill the silence. Victor put the pages back in the envelope. The burner number, he said. The one that connects to Stokes' shell company. Yes. The last call on this log was 4 days ago. Yes. To Daniel Cross. Daniel Cross said from across the room. Victor, don't, Victor said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look at Daniel. He said it to the bar top. Don't say anything right now, Daniel. I need another 60 seconds before I decide what I'm going to do, and if you start talking, I'm going to make a decision I can't take back. Daniel Cross closed his mouth. 60 seconds passed. Evelyn counted them without meaning to. Then Victor looked up and looked directly at Daniel and said, 4 days ago. I can explain, Daniel said. You've been running children through my terminal for 2 years, Victor said. Through my drivers, my manifests, my contacts. And 4 days ago, you were still on the phone with the man who owns the whole operation. It's not that simple. How much, Victor said. Daniel blinked. What? How much did he pay you? The silence that followed was its own answer. Whatever number Daniel Cross said was going to be the wrong number, and every person in the room understood that. 2 million, Daniel said. Victor nodded, not the nod of a man accepting information, the nod of a man filing something away in a place he wasn't going to forget. Mateo, Victor said. Yeah, take him to the back. Victor. Daniel took a step forward, and Garrett put a hand on his arm, and Daniel stopped. He looked at Victor with something on his face that might in another context have been desperation. Victor, you don't understand what Stokes is capable of. You take him on and you are not taking on one man. You are taking on a network. Judges, prosecutors, city officials, the man has protection so deep you cannot reach the bottom of it. If you go after him with what she has, he gestured at Evelyn, they will bury you. They will bury her. They will bury everything you've ever built. Probably, Victor said. Daniel stared at him. Take him to the back, Victor said again. And this time Mateo moved, and Garrett moved, and Daniel Cross, who had sat at Victor Moretti's right hand for 11 years and had spent the last 2 of them selling everything that hand had built, was walked out of the room. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Frank Caruso said, Victor, I need to say something. Go ahead. 20 years ago, and Frank's voice was steady but only barely. The warehouse, Margaret Blake. He stopped. He seemed to be making a decision about how much truth he was capable of saying out loud. Daniel called it, but I was there, and I didn't stop it, and I have carried that. He stopped again. Evelyn was looking at him. Her face was very still. I have carried that for 20 years, Frank said, and I'm not asking you to forgive it. Either of you. I'm just telling you it's true. Evelyn said, how old was I? Frank looked at her. 17. And my mother, 41, Frank said quietly, like a man reading from something he'd memorized a long time ago without meaning to. Did she say anything? Evelyn asked. Before. Frank looked like the question had physically hit him. She said your name, he said. She said it twice. Evelyn looked at the bar top. She didn't cry. She had done her crying a long time ago, in cities nobody knew her name in, and she had come to terms with the fact that grief didn't have a bottom, it just had different floors you learned to live on. She was on a high floor tonight. She needed to stay there. Okay, she said. I'm sorry, Frank said. I know that. I said, okay, Frank, she said. Not forgiven, not forgotten, just okay. I heard you. Victor had been watching this exchange with something in his face that was difficult to name. He looked at Evelyn and said, "What do you need from me?" "I need access to your records," she said. "The real ones. Not the ones Daniel would have seen, the ones you keep yourself. I need to map every contact point Stokes used in your organization. Every driver, every dock manager, every customs contact. I need the full picture. And then, then, and then we go to someone who can actually use it," she said. "Not the FBI, I told you they're compromised. But there's a federal prosecutor named Hartman who's been building a case against Stokes for 3 years with almost nothing. What I have combined with what you have, you want me to cooperate with a federal prosecutor," Victor said. "I want you to survive what's coming," she said. "Cooperating with Hartman is how you do that. You're asking me to put 23 years of my operation on a table in front of a federal prosecutor and hope he only uses the parts that hurt Stokes." "Yes," she said, "that's insane." "The alternative," she said, "is that Stokes burns you before you burn him, because he knows the container got flagged. He knows someone pulled those records. He probably already knows or will know very shortly that something went wrong tonight with Daniel. And when he starts pulling threads, your name is going to be the first thing he offers to anyone who will take it." Victor stared at the empty glass on the bar. "He'll trade me," Victor said. It wasn't a question. "He'll hand you to the FBI with a bow on it before the end of the week," she said. "And when he does, you won't have anything left to negotiate with. But right now, tonight, you have the documentation, you have Daniel, and you have me. That's enough to go to Hartman and set the terms yourself instead of waiting for Stokes to set them for you." Victor was quiet for a long time. Frank Caruso said, "She's right, Victor." "I know she's right," Victor said. "That's the part that bothers me." He pushed back from the bar and stood up and walked to the window and stood with his back to the room and both hands clasped behind him. Evelyn watched his shoulders. She had learned to read people in the silences, in the small physical tells. That happened when someone thought nobody was paying attention. Victor's shoulders were tight. Whatever was happening inside him was happening hard. "My father built this organization," he said to the window. "He built it from nothing. 40 years. He ran it for 20, I ran it for 23. In that time, we lost people. We made decisions that—" He stopped. "Some of those decisions I would not make again. Some of them I would. But there was a line. There was always a line. Children." His voice didn't break. Men like Victor Moretti didn't break in front of other people. But it altered a frequency shift barely audible. There was always a line. "I know," Evelyn said. "Stokes used my line," Victor said. "He used everything I built, and he crossed the one line I kept." "Yes." Victor turned around. "All right," he said. "What's your timeline?" 6 a.m. is when the copies go out regardless," she said. "I'd like to reach Hartman before that." Victor looked at Frank. "You have his private number." Frank blinked. "Hartman? Why would I have—" "Because 3 years ago you tried to negotiate a separate deal with him, and I told you to stand down, and you stood down, but you kept the number," Victor said. "I know you, Frank. 40 years. You kept the number." Frank reached into his pocket and took out his phone. "Find it," Victor said. While Frank scrolled, Evelyn watched Victor move around the room, checking in with each of his men. In turn, quick, low conversations. She couldn't fully hear the kind of rapid organizational recalibration that took most people days and was taking him minutes. Whatever else Victor Moretti was, he was not slow. He had not survived this long by being slow. She thought about her mother. She thought about a warehouse on the south side of Chicago 20 years ago, and a 17-year-old girl running through an alley with nothing but the clothes she was wearing, and one photograph she'd managed to grab on her way out the door. She thought about the years after the false names, the night school degrees, the slow, careful construction of a person who could do what she was doing right now. The analyst job at a shipping consultancy that gave her access to the transit databases she needed. The years of patience. The years of watching and waiting and telling herself the right moment would come. She had not expected Victor Moretti to step between her and a gun. She had not built that into any version of the plan, and she didn't know yet what to do with it. "I've got it," Frank said, and held up his phone. Victor came back to the bar. He took the phone from Frank and looked at the number. Then he looked at Evelyn. "You said Hartman's clean." "As clean as anyone gets in this Sidwell," she said. "That's not exactly a ringing endorsement." It's the most honest thing I can tell you. Victor almost smiled. Almost. Give me the room, he said to everyone except Evelyn. Frank looked at him. Go check on Mateo and Daniel. Make sure nothing's escalated. Everyone else out. The room cleared with the practiced efficiency of men who had spent years following that particular instruction. When they were gone, the club felt enormous, empty and enormous, and very quiet. Victor set Frank's phone on the bar. Before I make this call, he said, I need to know one more thing. And ask. The 20 years you spent building this case, he said, the documentation, the sources, the access to those transit databases. None of that happens without money. Real money. Serious money. He looked at her. Who funded you, Evelyn? She had known this question was coming. She had known it the way you know certain things are inevitable, not because you want them to be, but because the logic of the situation demands it. Hartman, she said. Victor stared at her. He's been funding my investigation for 3 years, she said. Off the books. Personal funds mostly. He couldn't pursue Stokes through official channels because Stokes has people inside the Justice Department. So he found me, or I found him, depending on how you tell the story, and we've been building it together. So Hartman already has everything you have, Victor said. He has what I've given him, she said, which is most of it. But he doesn't have you. He doesn't have Daniel. He doesn't have the internal documentation that proves Stokes was using your organization specifically. Without that, what he has is a strong circumstantial case. With it, she stopped. With it, he can end him, Victor said. With it, he can end all of them, she said. Stokes everyone. Stokes is protecting everyone who's been using the infrastructure. The whole network. Victor looked at the phone on the bar. You came in here tonight, he said slowly, not just to give me information. No, she said. You came to recruit me. I came to give you a choice, she said, between being the man who gets burned by a system that used you without your knowledge and being the man who lights the match himself. Victor picked up the phone. Hartman know I might be calling. He knows it was a possibility, she said. What did he say? She looked at him evenly. He said if Victor Moretti ever calls this number, pick up on the first ring. Victor Moretti dialed. It rang once. A voice answered on the other end, careful, wide awake. Despite the hour, the voice of a man who had been waiting for a call he wasn't sure would ever come. This is Hartman, the voice said. Victor looked at Evelyn across the bar. Something passed between them, not warmth exactly, not trust exactly, but the particular understanding that exists between two people who have just made a decision that is going to change everything and cannot be unmade. This is Victor Moretti, Victor said. I understand you have been looking for me. A pause. Mr. Moretti, Hartman said, I've been looking for you for 3 years. Well, Victor said, you found me. He picked up the bourbon glass still empty and turned it once in his hand. We need to talk about Gerald Stokes, and we need to do it tonight. Hartman said, I'll be there in an hour. Victor ended the call. He set the phone down. He set the glass down beside it. The night was not finished with them yet. Not by a long distance. Daniel Cross was in the back room with information Evelyn still hadn't fully extracted. Stokes was somewhere in the city, making calculations of his own, and the copies of the documentation were still sitting in 3 separate locations, waiting for a 6 a.m. trigger that none of them could afford to let go off accidentally. But for the first time since Evelyn Blake had walked into the Meridian 6 hours ago, there was something in the room that had not been there before. It was small. It was fragile. It had no guarantees attached to it. But it was there. Victor Moretti looked at the woman across the bar, the woman who had spent 20 years becoming invisible in order to walk into the most dangerous room in Chicago and tell the most dangerous man in it the truth. And he said very quietly, your mother would have been proud of you. Evelyn looked at him. Don't, she said. I know, he said. I know. And he did know. Some things were too large to touch with words, and both of them had lived long enough to understand that. So instead of saying anything else, Victor Moretti reached behind the bar, found a second glass, poured 2 fingers of bourbon into each, and set one in front of her. This time she picked it up. They didn't toast. There was nothing to toast yet. But they sat in the quiet of the empty club with their glasses in their hands and the weight of the next hour pressing down on everything, and waited for a federal prosecutor to walk through the door and change the shape of the world. In the back room, Daniel Cross was starting to understand that the exit he'd been counting on had closed an hour ago. And in an office building 14 blocks north, Gerald Stokes was staring at his phone, reading a text from a number that no longer answered, and beginning for the first time in 16 years of untouchable power to feel something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Afraid. Hartman arrived in 53 minutes, not 60. Evelyn heard the door before anyone else did. A single knock, 3 beats, the way someone knocks when they're trying to sound unhurried and aren't quite pulling it off. Victor nodded at the man nearest the entrance, and a moment later James Hartman walked into the Meridian carrying a leather briefcase and the expression of someone who had been running on coffee and controlled anxiety for so long it had become his default state. He was younger than his reputation suggested. Mid-40s maybe? A lean face, wire-rimmed glasses, a gray suit that fit well enough to have cost real money and been worn hard enough to look like it hadn't. He stopped just inside the door and took in the room, the empty tables, the absent quartet, the remaining men positioned at intervals that made the geometry of their purpose obvious, and he did not flinch. Evelyn respected that. His eyes found her first. "You made it," he said. "I made it," she said. Then he looked at Victor Moretti, and whatever Hartman had prepared himself to feel in this moment, whatever internal speech he'd given himself on the drive over, it was clearly not quite adequate for the reality of the man standing in front of him, because he was quiet for a full 3 seconds before he said, "Mr. Moretti." "Counselor," Victor said. "I want to be clear about something before we sit down," Hartman said. He set the briefcase on the nearest table. "Whatever arrangement we discuss tonight, it has to hold in daylight. I don't make deals I can't defend at 7 in the morning in front of my supervisor." "You have a supervisor who doesn't know you're here," Victor said. Hartman didn't deny it. "I have a supervisor who will know everything by morning," he said. "But the broad strokes of what we agree to tonight set the terms. I need you to understand that." "I understand it," Victor said. "Sit down." Hartman sat. Victor sat across from him. Evelyn stayed at the bar close enough to be in the conversation, far enough to watch both of them at once. She had spent 3 years getting to this table. She was not going to rush the next 30 minutes. "Daniel Cross is in the back room," Victor said. Hartman's eyebrows moved. "Is he cooperative?" "He's calculating," Victor said. "Right now he's trying to figure out whether giving you everything he knows about Stokes is worth more than what Stokes will do to him if he talks. He hasn't landed on an answer yet." "I can help him land on one," Hartman said. "I'm sure you can." Victor leaned forward. "But before you talk to Daniel, I want to talk to you about what I'm willing to give and what I'm not." Hartman opened the briefcase and took out a yellow legal pad and a pen. He clicked the pen once. "Go ahead." "I'll give you Stokes," Victor said. "Everything, the shell companies, the call logs, the transit records, the manifests. I'll give you every contact point he used inside my organization. Every driver, every dock supervisor, every customs official who looked the other way. I'll give you the full picture." "And in exchange," Hartman said. "My organization," Victor said. "What I've built, you don't touch it." Hartman put the pen down. "Mr. Moretti." "I'm not finished," Victor said. "I know what you're going to say. I know what you want. You want all of it, Stokes, and everything he used and everything adjacent to it, which means me. I understand that, but I'm telling you right now, if that's the only arrangement you're willing to consider, this conversation ends and you walk back out that door with what you already have, which Evelyn tells me is a circumstantial case that Stokes' legal team will eat in about 40 minutes. Hartman picked the pen back up. "What you're describing is full immunity for a 23-year criminal enterprise. What I'm describing," Victor said, "is the choice between Stokes and nothing, or Stokes and what I give you on terms I can live with." He paused. "I'm 61 years old, OS. I've been running this organization longer than most federal prosecutors have been in the workforce. I'm not going to pretend I don't know how this ends eventually. But tonight is not eventually. Tonight I'm offering you something you have been trying to build for 3 years and cannot build without me. How long do you want to argue about the price?" Hartman then looked at Evelyn. She gave him nothing. She had told him when they first started working together that she would not advocate for Victor Moretti's terms. She would deliver him to the table. What happened at the table was between them. "I can offer partial immunity," Hartman said carefully. "Specific charges, specific time frames, not a blanket." "Specific how?" Victor said. "The trafficking operation," Hartman said. "Everything connected to Container 404, everything connected to Stokes' network. You cooperate fully on all of it. You testify if it comes to that, and those charges don't land on you. What existed before Stokes, what exists independent of Stokes, that's a separate conversation for a separate day. Victor looked up at him. You're leaving a door open. I'm being honest with you, Hartman said, which is more than you're used to from people in my position. A blanket immunity agreement for everything you've done since 1991 is not something I can deliver, and you know it. But full protection on the Stokes matter, a documented record of your cooperation, and my personal commitment to argue for leniency on anything subsequent that I can do. Victor was quiet. Frank Caruso had slipped back into the room at some point and was standing near the far wall. He caught Victor's eye and gave him a barely perceptible nod. Victor looked back at Hartman. You need Daniel's testimony to make the case airtight, Victor said. Daniel's testimony plus yours plus the documentation would make it bulletproof, Hartman said. Then here's what we do, Victor said. You talk to Daniel. You give him whatever you need to give him to get him talking. And while you do that, I'm going to get you something better than the call logs. Hartman paused mid-note. Better how? Victor looked at Evelyn. You told me Stokes has been using the organization for at least 2 years. Based on what I can document, she said, the first flag transit was 26 months ago. There's a safe, Victor said to Hartman. Not here. Location I'm not going to disclose until we have a signed agreement in front of a witness. In that safe, there are 11 years of ledgers. Everything that's come through my organization, every transaction, every name, every arrangement, I kept it as insurance. I kept it because in this business, you keep things that scare people because scared people don't move against you. He paused. Stokes is in those ledgers, going back further than 26 months. The pen stopped moving. How much further, Hartman said. Far enough, Victor said, that the story changes. Evelyn felt something cold move through her. She looked at Victor. How far, she said. He looked at her. Something in the way he looked at her, careful, weighted the look of a man who was deciding in real time how much truth a person can absorb in a single night, told her before he said a word. Stokes didn't start with the containers, Victor said. He started with favors, legitimate ones on paper. Zoning approvals, licensing, the kind of arrangement that looks like a political relationship until you know what was underneath it. He stopped. The first arrangement I have documented is from 14 years ago. Evelyn's voice was very controlled when she said, what was the arrangement? Victor looked at her steadily. A warehouse, he said. South Side, Oregon. 14 years ago, which means 2 years before the night your mother died, and the room went completely still. Stokes owned that warehouse, Victor said, through 4 layers of holding companies. My organization used it for storage. I didn't know who the ultimate owner was. I was dealing with a property management company. Stokes didn't reveal himself to me directly until years later. He paused. But the ledger shows the chain of ownership, and if a prosecutor traces it, he was connected to that location, Evelyn said. Yes. Before my mother died. Yes. She sat with that for a moment, just sat with it. Victor didn't rush her. Hartman, to his credit, didn't say anything either. Some information needed a few seconds to find somewhere to land inside a person. You didn't know, she said finally. Not a question. I didn't know, Victor said, and I understand that doesn't change what happened, but I needed you to know that the ledger exists and what's in it. Because when Hartman goes after Stokes, that connection is going to come out, and I didn't want you to hear it from a prosecutor. Evelyn pressed her lips together. She looked at the bar top. 14 years ago, 2 years before her mother's murder. Stokes connected to the location, connected to the organization, connected to a chain of arrangements that her mother had stumbled into the edge of somehow in some way that Evelyn was only now beginning to understand the shape of. My mother, she said, she didn't just witness something random. No, Victor said quietly. I don't think she did. She was looking into Stokes. Victor said nothing, which was its own answer. Hartman said carefully, Evelyn, if your mother was conducting some kind of informal investigation into Stokes's activities 14 years ago, that changes the legal picture significantly. It means her death was potentially connected to the same network we're prosecuting tonight, which means it's not just trafficking, Evelyn said. It's murder, federal murder, connected to a sitting U.S. senator. Yes, Hartman said. She stood up from the bar stool. She walked to the end of the bar and stood with her back to both of them for a moment and breathed. She had come into this club tonight with a plan, a very good plan, 20 years in the making, every contingency considered, every angle covered. She had not planned for this. She had not allowed herself to consider that her mother's death was anything other than a crime of proximity, wrong place, wrong time, wrong witness. The idea that her mother had been looking for the same thing she had spent 20 years looking for was too large to hold all at once. "How sure are you?" she said without turning around. "The ledger shows what it shows," Victor said. "What it means, that's for people smarter than me to determine." She turned back around. Her face was steady. She had too much left to do tonight to fall apart, and she had learned, in 20 years of living as someone else, how to put things in a box and close the lid until there was time to open it properly. She put this in a box and closed the lid. "Get Daniel," she said to Victor. "Get him in this room right now." Victor looked at Frank. Frank left. Hartman was already writing. The legal pad was half full. He wrote with the concentrated speed of a man who understood that the conversation he was having was the most important one of his career and was trying to capture every word before it disappeared. Daniel Cross came into the room a minute later with Mateo behind him, and a look on his face that had moved over the last hour from calculation to something that was starting to resemble genuine fear. Fear was good. Fear meant the math was hitting him. He looked at Hartman and stopped. "You're James Hartman," Hartman said, "Assistant U.S. Attorney." "Sit down, Mr. Cross." Daniel looked at Victor. "You actually called him." "Sit down, Daniel," Victor said. Daniel sat. "Here's where we are," Hartman said in the measured, precise tone of a man who had done this before and was good at it. "I have documentation connecting you to Gerald Stokes' trafficking operation through a series of calls made from a burner number to a shell company that Stokes controls. I have your name on altered manifests for at least 3 separate container shipments, and I have a witness who can place you at the center of this operation going back 24 months. Daniel looked at Evelyn. Something passed through his expression, recognition maybe, or something older and more complicated than recognition. "Who are you?" he said. "It doesn't matter who I am," she said. "It matters to me," he said, "because I've never seen you before tonight, and yet you walked into this room and unraveled 2 years of—" He stopped. "You're not just an analyst with access to transit databases." "No," she said. "Stokes," Daniel said slowly. "Stokes knows about you." The room shifted. "What did you just say?" Victor said. Daniel turned to him. 4 days ago, the call you saw on the log, Stokes didn't just call me about the container. He called me because someone had been running searches on his shell companies through a shipping consultancy database. He had an IT contact who flagged the search pattern. He wanted to know if I knew who it was. Daniel looked at Evelyn. "I told him I didn't, because I didn't. But he stopped. He said he was going to find out." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "How long ago was that call?" 4 days, Daniel said. 4 days, she said, which means he's had 4 days to trace the search pattern back to my firm. "Possibly," Daniel said. "Not possibly," she said. "If he has an IT contact at the database level, he traces it back in 48 hours maximum." She looked at Hartman. "He knows who I am." "Then he knows you're here," Hartman said. "He knows my professional identity," she said. "He may not know my real name, but he knows the consultancy, which means he knows where I work, which means—" Her phone buzzed. She took it out. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer it. She answered it. "Ms. Blake," said the voice on the other end. Everything in her body went cold. Gerald Stokes had a voice like a man who had spent 40 years being told he was the smartest person in every room. Smooth, patient. The voice of someone who had never once in his adult life needed to raise it. "Senator," she said. The room, which had been moving, breathing, operating, stopped. Victor crossed to her in 4 steps. She put the phone on speaker without him having to ask. "I want to compliment you," Stokes said. 20 years is a very long time to build something. Your mother would have been impressed. She was a persistent woman." Evelyn said nothing. "I understand you're having quite a gathering tonight," Stokes said. "I imagine Mr. Moretti is there. Possibly Mr. Hartman, if my instincts are right." A pause. "Am I right, James?" Hartman in his expression didn't change. "You're right," he said. "Good," Stokes said. "Then I'll say this to all of you at once, which saves time. What you have, the documentation, the ledgers, whatever Victor has been keeping in whatever safe he thinks I don't know about, is impressive. It really is. But it is also entirely useless." "Explain that," Hartman said. 2 hours ago, Stokes said, "A federal judge I've known for 21 years signed an order placing the Calumet shipping terminal under a national security review. As of this moment, all transit records associated with that terminal for the past 36 months are classified. Every manifest, every call log, every financial record associated with any entity that processed shipments through that terminal is now subject to a federal seal that not even you, James, have clearance to access. Hartman went white. The documentation Evelyn has been collecting, Stokes continued, was largely sourced through that terminal's records, which means that what she has is now either classified material possession, of which carries its own implications, or it was obtained through methods that will make it inadmissible regardless. He paused. I really do admire the work. I want you to know that, but you came at me with a knife, and I've been holding a gun for 6 months waiting to see if you'd try. Silence. Then Victor said, You made a mistake, Gerald. The use of the first name, not Senator, not Stokes, just Gerald, the way you'd address someone you'd already decided was finished, put something new in the air. Did I? Stokes said. The ledger I mentioned, Victor said. You think you know where it is. You don't. Because the safe you're thinking of, the one your people identified 18 months ago when you started planning this exit, is empty. Has been for 8 months. Because I moved everything the same week you came to my daughter's wedding and shook my hand and told me what a fine girl she was. A pause, longer than the previous ones. You knew, Stokes said. I suspected, Victor said. I didn't know about the children. I didn't know the extent of what you were running through my infrastructure. But I knew you were running something, and I knew eventually you were going to need to cut a loose end. I made sure I wasn't the loose end you thought I was. Where is it? Stokes said. The ledger, Victor said. In a location that has nothing to do with the Calumet terminal, which means your national security order doesn't touch it, which means Hartman can have it in his hands by 8 o'clock this morning through a completely clean chain of custody. The line was quiet. You're bluffing, Stokes said. Gerald, Victor said. In 40 years, have you ever once known me to bluff? Another silence. This one had a different texture. Evelyn had spent 20 years learning to read silences, and this one sounded like a man recalculating the distance between where he was standing and somewhere safe, and finding the distance was greater than he'd thought. This isn't over, Stokes said. It is, Evelyn said. She said it quietly. Not triumphantly. She had no triumph in her tonight, only a kind of bone-deep exhaustion and something harder beneath it that was going to take a long time to identify properly. It was over the minute I walked into this room. You just didn't know it yet. The line went dead. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Hartman said, The national security order is real. I need to verify it, but if you got a federal judge to sign it, it's real, which means the terminal documentation is going to be a problem. It's going to be a challenge, Victor corrected. Not a problem. There's a difference. He looked at Evelyn. The ledger. I need to get it to Hartman tonight, before Stokes makes any other calls. How long? She asked. 90 minutes, he said, maybe less. Then we have 90 minutes, she said. Daniel Cross said from his chair in a voice that had lost most of its calculation and was now mostly something rawer and smaller. He's going to come after all of us, not through the courts. He's going to come after all of us directly. Let him try, Victor said. Victor, Daniel. Victor looked at him with something that was not kindness, but was not cruelty either. It was the look of a man who had moved past whatever personal history existed between them and was now operating entirely in the present tense. You have one thing left you can do that has any value. You know Stokes' network better than anyone in this room because he trusted you in ways he didn't trust anyone else. Write it down, all of it. Every name, every arrangement, every favor owed and paid. You do that tonight completely and honestly, and Hartman has something to work with that doesn't depend on the terminal records or the ledger. Daniel Cross looked at the legal pad on the table. He looked at the pen. He looked at the door, then at Mateo, then back at Victor. And if I do, he said, what happens to me? You survive this, Victor said. That's more than you deserve, and probably more than you'll get if Stokes reaches you first. So I'd start writing. Daniel Cross picked up the pen. Hartman moved his chair closer and opened to a fresh page of his own legal pad, and the two of them began, the federal prosecutor and the criminal lieutenant, constructing on paper the architecture of a 16-year conspiracy that had touched the lives of hundreds of people who had never known it existed. Evelyn watched them for a moment. Then she walked to the far side of the room and sat down at one of the empty tables and took her phone out and sent a message to each of the 3 locations where she'd left copies of the documentation. Short messages, Nothing that would read as meaningful to anyone who intercepted them. But the people receiving them would understand hold until further notice. Then she put the phone down and sat in the quiet and let herself feel for exactly 60 seconds the full weight of everything that had happened in the last 5 hours. The plan she had built over 20 years, landing exactly where she'd aimed it. Daniel's revelation about her mother. The call from Stokes. Victor Moretti stepping between her and a gun without a reason in the world to do it. 60 seconds. Then she picked the phone back up and called the one person she hadn't called yet, the woman who had been her contact inside the shipping consultancy who had helped her access the databases, who had no idea tonight that any of this had happened. The phone rang 4 times and went to voicemail. Evelyn's stomach dropped. She called again. 4 rings, voicemail. She stood up. She crossed to Victor, who was watching Hartman and Daniel work from a few feet away, and she touched his arm. He looked at her. He read her face. "What?" he said. "My contact," she said. "The one inside the consultancy who helped me access the databases." She's not answering. Victor's expression shifted into something immediate and serious. "When did you last reach her?" 6 hours ago, Evelyn said, "before I came here." "Stokes," Victor said. "He had 4 days to trace the search pattern," she said. "If he got to the databases, he got to the source. If he got to the source," she stopped. She didn't finish the sentence because finishing it meant going somewhere she couldn't afford to go right now. Victor said very quietly, "Frank." Frank materialized from somewhere behind him. "I need 2 people at an address," Victor said. "Right now, not tomorrow, now." Evelyn gave him the address. Her voice was steady, her hands were not. Frank was on his phone before she finished speaking. Across the room, Daniel Cross was still writing. Hartman was still listening. The night was still moving, still grinding forward on its own terrible momentum. And somewhere in the city, Gerald Stokes was making calls to people who answered on the first ring. And Evelyn Blake, who had spent 20 years building a case and a life and a plan, was standing in a room full of men she had not trusted 6 hours ago, realizing that the ground beneath everything she'd constructed was shifting and that the next hour was going to tell her whether what she'd built was strong enough to hold. Frank's men reached the address in 11 minutes. Evelyn knew this because she was watching the clock on her phone and counting the way she had learned to count things in the years when counting was the only control she had over anything. 11 minutes from Frank's call to the confirmation text that came back in 2 words. "She's okay." She exhaled. She hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath until the air came out of her in one long, shaking release that she immediately steadied because there were still too many people in the room watching too many things, and she could not afford to look like someone who had just come apart at the edges even slightly. "She's okay," she said to Victor. He nodded once. He had been standing close enough to see her phone without reading it, and she had the sense that he'd been counting along with her without knowing he was doing it. "Stokes didn't get to her," he said. "Not yet," Evelyn said. "We move faster than yet," Victor said. He turned to Frank. "I need the car and I need Garrett. 20 minutes. Frank was already moving. Hartman looked up from the table where Daniel was still writing the legal pad, now 3/4 full. Daniel's handwriting cramped and rapid, the handwriting of someone trying to outrun something. "Where are you going?" Hartman said. "To get you the ledger," Victor said. "I'm coming with you," Hartman said. "No," Victor said. "You're staying here with Daniel until he finishes that statement. If you leave this room before he's done, he stops writing. And right now, that statement is the thing Stokes can't seal with your national security order because it lives in Daniel's head and not in any terminal database." Hartman looked at Daniel. Daniel was writing. He didn't look up. 90 minutes, Hartman said. "Less," Victor said. He looked at Evelyn. "You're coming with me." It wasn't a question. She picked up her jacket. They went out through the back of the club, Victor, Evelyn, and Garrett, who was a broad-shouldered man of very few words, who had been with Victor for 9 years and whose primary professional skill was making problems stop being problems. The car was already running when they came through the door. Frank had been efficient. Frank was always efficient. It was the thing that had kept him alive in an organization that didn't tolerate much else. They were moving before the doors were fully closed. "Where are we going?" Evelyn said. "Cicero," Victor said. "There's a dry cleaning business on Kermaki that I've owned through a holding company since 2003. Nobody connects it to me. I've had an account there under a different name for 11 years. The owner, a man named Petrov, keeps a storage room in the back that has never been searched, audited, or visited by anyone except me." He looked straight ahead through the windshield. The ledger is in a fireproof box in that storage room. Has been for 8 months. You moved it right after the wedding, and Evelyn said. 3 days after, he said. Stokes came to my daughter's wedding and spent 40 minutes telling me what a good man I was. 40 minutes. Nobody who's clean spends 40 minutes telling you they're clean. He paused. I didn't know what he was covering. I didn't know about the children, but I knew he was covering something, and I knew that if it ever surfaced, he was going to need someone to hand to the people asking questions. I wasn't going to be that person. So you spent 8 months building your own exit. I spent 8 months making sure I had options, he said. That's different from an exit. She looked at him. In the moving dark of the car, with the city sliding past the windows and the clock on the dashboard reading 4:17 a.m., Victor Moretti looked like what he was, a man in his 60s who had spent his entire adult life making decisions that other people paid for, and who was somewhere in the middle of the long, slow process of understanding what that meant. He didn't look broken. Victor Moretti was never going to look broken. But he looked real in a way he hadn't looked 4 hours ago when she'd first seen him across the bar, like a person rather than a position. She didn't know what to do with that either. My mother, she said. She had promised herself she would put it in a box until there was time, but they had 40 minutes in a car, and the box wasn't holding the way she needed it to. What you said back there about Stokes being connected to the warehouse 14 years ago. Yes, he said. You think she was investigating him? I think it's possible, he said carefully. What I know for certain is that she came to that warehouse looking for something. I know that because the men who found her, Daniel and the others, said she had documents with her. Papers. They didn't know what the papers contained. They were told to take them and make sure she couldn't talk about whatever she'd found. He stopped. I was told it was a competitor. Someone moving against my logistics operation. That's what Daniel told me. That's what I believed for 20 years. You believed him, Evelyn said. He was my most trusted man, Victor said. That's what trust costs you sometimes, someone using it against you in ways you can't see. Evelyn said she was a paralegal, my mother. She worked for a law firm downtown for 16 years. Small firm, mostly real estate and corporate work. She paused. I never understood when I was growing up why she worked so many late nights. I thought it was billing hours. I thought it was just the job. She stopped. If she was tracing Stokes' shell company ownership through real estate transactions, that's exactly the kind of work she'd have access to. That's exactly the kind of thing a paralegal in a small real estate firm would stumble into without anyone thinking to warn her off. Yes, Victor said. She wasn't just a witness to something random, Evelyn said. She was getting close to something. And someone told Stokes. And Stokes told Daniel. That's my read, Victor said. The car moved through the empty, pre-dawn streets of the city. Nobody spoke for a minute. I came into this tonight thinking you were the primary villain, Evelyn said. I know, Victor said. I was prepared for you to be the primary villain. I know that too. She looked at him. You're not a good man, Victor. No, he said. I'm not. But Stokes is something worse, she said. Stokes is something specific, Victor said. He's a man who decided a long time ago that the rules exist for other people. Men like me, we operate outside the law. We know it, everyone knows it. There's a kind of honesty to it, even when there's nothing else honest about it. But Stokes stands inside the law. He makes the law. He uses the law to protect things that the law was built to destroy. He paused. That's a different category of wrong. Evelyn thought about that. She thought about 20 years of building a case against a man she had believed was the source of everything that had gone wrong in her life, and arriving here in this car at this hour, understanding that the source was further back and higher up than she'd ever aimed. If Hartman takes down Stokes, she said, and the trafficking network falls and the documentation holds up in court, what happens to you? Victor was quiet for a moment. Depends on how honest Hartman is about the agreement, he said. If he honors what we discussed, partial immunity on the Stokes-related charges, documented cooperation, his personal advocacy on anything subsequent, I probably have 18 months before someone else at Justice decides they want to re-examine things. Maybe 2 years. And then I have a decision to make, he said, about how I want to spend whatever time I have left. He didn't say it with self-pity or drama. He said it the way you state facts about weather. I have a daughter. She doesn't know most of what I've done. She knows some of it enough that she married a man who lives in Denver and puts 1,200 miles between herself and Chicago when she can. But she's mine, and I've been the reason she keeps that distance long enough. Evelyn didn't say anything. I'm not asking for anything, he said. I'm telling you who I am outside this situation. Because you deserve to know who you made this deal with. I know who I made this deal with, she said. Do you? Yes, she said. A man who stepped in front of a gun for a stranger. Who moved a ledger 8 months ago because he knew something was wrong and spent the time since waiting for someone to walk through his door and prove it. Who listened to me for 40 minutes when the easier thing by far would have been to have me removed. She paused. That doesn't make you good Victor, but it makes you something. He didn't respond to that, but something in his shoulders shifted slightly, and she chose to leave it alone. The car stopped. Garrett said quietly, "We're here." Victor said, "Stay with the car." He looked at Evelyn. 2 minutes. They went in through a side entrance. Petrov, the heavy-set man in his 70s who clearly had not been expecting company at 4:30 in the morning and was managing it with the resigned composure of someone for whom unexpected visitors had long since stopped being surprising, let them in without a word and led them through the back of the shop to the storage room. Victor knew where to go from there. He went to a shelving unit along the back wall and moved it 18 inches to the left with the practiced ease of someone who had done it before. Behind the shelving unit was a section of drywall with a small seam in it. Victor pressed 2 points along the seam in sequence and a panel came free. Behind the panel was a fireproof steel box, matte black, about the size of a large dictionary. He took the box and they were back in the car in 4 minutes. He handed the box to Evelyn. She held it on her lap. It was heavier than it looked. 11 years, she said. 11 years, he confirmed. She looked at the box. She thought about what was inside it, names, numbers, arrangements, all the invisible architecture of a world that operated below the surface of the visible one. And she thought about the fact that somewhere in those pages was a thread that led back to her mother, to a warehouse, to a night 20 years ago, that had made her into the person sitting in this car at this hour holding this box. This ends Stokes, she said. Combined with Daniel's statement and what Hartman already has, Victor said yes, this ends Stokes. And everyone he's protecting. That's going to take longer, Victor said. Networks like his don't fall in one night. They fall in pieces over time as the people inside them realize the center isn't holding anymore and start making their own survival calculations. But this, he glanced at the box, this starts the fall. This is the first piece. Evelyn's phone rang. She looked at the screen. Hartman, she answered. We have a problem, Hartman said. His voice had changed. The careful, measured tone was still there, but something underneath it had gone tight. Daniel stopped writing 20 minutes ago. He asked for water. I got him water, and when I turned back around, he had Mateo's phone. Evelyn's stomach dropped. He made a call. One call, Hartman said. Mateo took the phone back immediately, but the call connected. 42 seconds. Who did he call? Victor said. He had heard it. He was leaning in. Unknown number, Hartman said. Mateo is trying to trace it, but he called Stokes, Evelyn said. That's my read, Hartman said. What did he say? Victor said. Mateo heard partial audio. Something about a location. Something about, Hartman paused. Something about Cicero. The word landed. Victor looked at Evelyn. Evelyn looked at Victor. He knew, Victor said. Not to Evelyn, not to Hartman, to himself in the quiet voice of a man confirming something he'd half suspected and hoped was wrong. He knew about Petrov, about the storage room. How, Evelyn said, because 11 years ago when I first set it up, Daniel was the one person I trusted with the location, in case something happened to me. His jaw tightened. I updated him 8 months ago when I moved the ledger, told him the box had been moved to a secondary location. Didn't give him the address specifically, but if Stokes has been running Daniel for 2 years, he stopped. If Stokes has had 2 years to collect what Daniel knows, they know Petrov, Evelyn said. They might not have the specific address, but they know to look for a Cicero business connected to you. Garrett, Victor said, how far are we from the Meridian? 12 minutes, Garrett said, and drive, Victor said. Garrett drove. Evelyn clutched the box and looked at the side mirror and saw nothing behind them. No headlights that didn't belong, no pattern that felt wrong, but she knew that the absence of visible threat was not the same as the absence of threat, and she knew that Stokes had been playing this game for 16 years and did not need to put a car behind them to know where they were going. Hartman, she said, the call was still open. Get Daniel away from Mateo and put him somewhere he can't reach anyone else. And call whoever you need to call to get a federal presence at the Meridian in the next 15 minutes. I can't call in a federal presence without explaining why. Then explain why, she said. You're an assistant U.S. attorney building a case against a sitting senator. Use that. Use all of it. Call your supervisor who doesn't know you're here and tell him everything. Right now, tonight. Because if Stokes is making moves based on what Daniel just told him, the next 20 minutes are going to determine whether we walk into a federal proceeding Monday morning or whether this entire night disappears. A pause. I'll make the call, Hartman said. He hung up. Victor said, you trust him. I trust that he wants Stokes more than he wants to protect himself. Evelyn said, that's enough for tonight. 8 minutes later, Garrett pulled up outside the Meridian, and Evelyn saw immediately that something was wrong. The front of the building was dark. No, not dark. The lights were out. All of them. The single exterior lamp above the entrance that had been burning when they left was gone. And Frank Caruso was standing on the sidewalk outside the door with his phone to his ear and an expression that Evelyn recognized as controlled alarm, the face of a man who has discovered something bad and is managing the discovery. Victor was out of the car before it fully stopped. Frank, he said. Someone cut the power to the block, Frank said. 15 minutes ago. City crew, or people dressed like a city crew. 2 of my guys went to check. They found the junction box open and a van parked 2 streets over with no plates. Anyone inside, Victor said. Hartman and Daniel are in the back office. I moved them when the lights went. I've got 3 men with them. Stokes's people, Evelyn said. They're not here to kill anyone. They're here to collect Daniel. Victor looked at her. Why collect him when they could just... Because a dead Daniel is a martyr with a finished statement sitting in Hartman's briefcase, she said. A disappeared Daniel is a missing witness with an unfinished statement that Stokes's lawyers can argue was coerced. Stokes needs Daniel gone, not dead. At least not here, not tonight. Frank said the Vanson, where exactly? Well, no, Victor said. Frank told him. Victor looked at Garrett. Garrett nodded and moved without being told anything else. 2 other men who had emerged from the club at some point followed him. This was Evelyn understood the part of Victor Moretti's world that she had only read about in transit logs and financial records, the operational reality of men who move through problems the way other people move through rooms. She followed Victor inside. The back office was a small room that smelled like old paper and cigarette smoke from an era when smoking in offices was still a thing people did without apology. Hartman was standing with his back against the wall and his briefcase in his hand and his phone pressed to his ear. Daniel Cross was seated in a chair in the corner with one of Victor's men standing directly behind him, and Daniel had the look of a man who had just understood fully and finally that the move he'd made 20 minutes ago had not helped him the way he'd calculated it would. Hartman ended his call. My supervisor is on his way, he said. 2 federal agents are 12 minutes out. Stokes sent people, Victor said. They're outside. Hartman's expression tightened. How many? We're finding out, Victor said. Daniel said from the corner, I didn't tell him you were here. His voice was flat and defeated. I told him about the ledger, about Cicero. That's it. That's enough, Evelyn said. I know, Daniel said. He looked at his hands. I know. Victor looked at him for a long moment. The look between them was not warm. It would never be warm, not after what had come out tonight, but it was something. 20 years of proximity, 20 years of trust misplaced and trust betrayed, and beneath all of it, 2 men who had started in the same world and arrived at entirely different reckonings. You're going to finish that statement, Victor said. Every word, everything you know about Stokes and the network and every name in it. You're going to finish it, sign it, and give it to Hartman before those federal agents walk through the door. And if I do, Daniel said, and if you do, Victor said, what happens next to you is out of my hands. But you go into it with a completed statement and a documented act of cooperation, which is better than you deserve and more than you had 10 minutes ago. Daniel looked at the legal pad on the table in front of him. He picked up the pen. He started writing again. Evelyn set the fireproof box on the table next to Hartman. The ledger, she said. 11 years of documented transactions. Every contact, every arrangement, every name. She paused. Including Stokes going back further than the terminal records. And including documentation of the warehouse on the south side where my mother was killed 14 years ago, which connects directly to Stokes's network and establishes a pattern of using your infrastructure to eliminate people who got too close to him. Hartman looked at the box. He looked at Evelyn. You understand what you're giving me, he said. I understand exactly what I'm giving you, she said. I've understood it for 20 years. Hartman put his hand on the box. This is enough, he said quietly, with Daniel's statement. With your documentation from the terminal, classified or not, there are legal pathways to challenge that seal. And with what's in this box backing it up, this is enough to take to a grand jury. He paused. This is enough to end him. Evelyn said, I know. Outside, there was a brief, sharp sound, not a gunshot, something lower, more mechanical, and then a car engine turning over hard and tires on pavement. Evelyn's grip tightened on nothing. Then Victor's phone buzzed, and he looked at it, and his expression shifted from tight to something fractionally less tight. Garrett, he said, van's gone. 3 men cleared out on foot. Nobody made a move inside. Evelyn exhaled for the second time that night. They realized the window closed, she said. Stokes miscalculated the timeline, Victor said. He thought he had more time before Hartman got federal backup inbound. He's been miscalculating since he made that call, she said. Every move he's made tonight has been reactive. That's not how he usually operates. He's rattled. Good, Victor said. It means he's going to make another move, she said. And this time it won't be subtle. Victor looked at her. Let him. You're confident, she said. I'm realistic, he said. The ledger is in Hartman's hands. Daniel is finishing the statement. He checked the time. 8 minutes, 2 federal agents walk through that door, and everything in this room becomes part of an official federal proceeding that Stokes cannot seal with a national security order because the order only covers the terminal records, not this. He gestured at the box the legal paid the room. He played his best card, and it wasn't enough. What he does next is desperation, and desperate men make mistakes. Hartman's phone rang. He answered, listened for 30 seconds, and when he looked up, his expression had changed in a way that made everyone in the room pay attention. That was my supervisor, Hartman said. And Victor said, Gerald Stokes submitted his resignation from the United States Senate 40 minutes ago, Hartman said, citing personal reasons and declining to elaborate. Nobody spoke. Then Daniel Cross, still writing without looking up, said, he's running. He can't run, Evelyn said. Not from this. He's trying, Hartman said. Resignation removes some of the political protection. It doesn't remove the legal exposure. If anything, it makes the case cleaner. He's no longer a sitting senator, which eliminates some of the procedural complications. He looked at Evelyn. He knows the ledger exists. He knows Daniel's talking. He's trying to get ahead of it. He's 16 years too late to get ahead of it, she said. The door at the front of the office opened, and Frank Caruso stepped in. He looked at Victor and said, 2 federal agents outside. They're asking for Hartman. Hartman straightened his jacket. He picked up his briefcase. He picked up the fireproof box. He looked at Victor Moretti, the man whose name had been in more federal case files than any other in the state of Illinois for the better part of 2 decades, and he said, I meant what I told you earlier about honoring the agreement. I know, Victor said. Whatever happens next, the process is going to be complicated and long. And there are people in my office who are not going to be happy about the terms. I've dealt with unhappy people my whole life, Victor said. Hartman almost smiled. I imagine you have. He looked at Evelyn. You should come with me. When I talk to the agents, there are things they need to hear from you directly. Evelyn nodded. She looked at Victor Moretti, standing in the back office of a jazz club at 5 a.m. with his empire restructured around him and a federal proceeding about to start in the next room, looked at the woman who had walked into his club 6 hours ago and taken everything apart with a question and a box of documents and 20 years of patience. And he said very quietly, you did what you came to do. Not yet, she said, not until it's finished. It'll finish, he said. It'll take time, but it'll finish. She looked at him one more moment, then she turned and followed Hartman to the door. Behind her, Victor Moretti sat down in the only chair in the room that wasn't occupied, put his elbows on his knees, and for the first time in as long as he could remember, did nothing. Just sat, just breathed, just let the night settle around him like a thing that had finally stopped moving. Daniel Cross kept writing. The pen scratched against the paper in the quiet, and outside, the first suggestion of gray was beginning at the edges of the sky, not light yet, not quite, but the promise of it, the way the darkness thins before it breaks. And Chicago was still there, exactly where it had always been, waiting to see what kind of city it was going to be when the sun finally came up. The two federal agents were named Reyes and Doherty, and they were professional enough to keep their faces neutral when Hartman introduced them to Evelyn in the narrow hallway outside the back office at 5:14 in the morning. Reyes was a compact woman in her 30s with sharp eyes that cataloged everything in the room in about 4 seconds. Doherty was older, closer to 50, with the deliberate movements of someone who had learned a long time ago not to waste energy on reactions that didn't serve a purpose. They asked good questions. Evelyn answered them directly and completely the way she had been preparing to answer them for 20 years. She gave them the documentation timeline, the search methodology, the chain of custody for everything in Hartman and his briefcase. She told them about the national security order and the terminal records and why the ledger in the fireproof box was a separate evidentiary track that the order couldn't touch. She told them about her mother. Reyes stopped writing when Evelyn got to that part. You're telling me the murder of Margaret Blake in 2004 is connected to the same network we're opening a proceeding on tonight, Reyes said. I'm telling you the documentation supports that connection, Evelyn said. Whether it rises to the legal standard you need is something for people with law degrees to determine. But yes, that's what I'm telling you. Reyes looked at Doherty. Doherty looked at his notepad. Ms. Blake, Doherty said, I want to make sure I understand your role here correctly. You've been conducting an independent investigation into Senator Stokes for 3 years in active collaboration with Hartman, she said. 20 years in total, though the earlier years were more preliminary. Preliminary, Doherty said. I was learning what I needed to learn, she said. That takes time. Doherty wrote something down. And your contact inside the shipping consultancy, the woman whose safety you were concerned about earlier tonight. She's secure, Evelyn said. Victor Moretti's people reached her. She needs to be formally protected as a material witness, which I'd ask you to prioritize as soon as this conversation is done. Reyes was already on her phone, Bert Bone. Hartman said from the doorway, Daniel Cross has completed his statement. Doherty stood up. I'll take it. He went through the door. Evelyn heard briefly the sound of Daniel's voice, flat exhausted. The voice of a man who had been talking for hours and had nothing left to protect. And then the door closed again. And it was just Evelyn and Reyes and Hartman in the hallway. Reyes said, You should know that Gerald Stokes' personal attorney contacted our office 40 minutes ago. He's claiming the ledger was obtained through illegal means and is moving to have any evidence derived from it suppressed. Evelyn had expected this. She had expected it the way you expect rain when the sky has been darkening for hours. The ledger is Victor Moretti's private property, she said. He provided it voluntarily as part of a cooperation agreement with Hartman. There's no illegal acquisition argument. Stokes' attorney is going to make one anyway, Reyes said. Stokes' attorney is going to make every argument available to him, Evelyn said. That's what Stokes is paying him for. But Hartman's been building this case for 3 years, and the ledger is clean, and Daniel's statement is clean, and the documentation I collected is going to survive the classified records challenge because the search methodology is airtight. She paused. Stokes resigned an hour ago. His attorney is running the same play his client is running, delay, suppress, complicate. It's not going to work. It didn't work against what we have. Reyes studied her. You've been preparing for this conversation for a while. I've been preparing for every conversation in this building for a while, Evelyn said. Reyes almost smiled. Not quite, but close. There's going to be a formal deposition, she said, in the next 48 hours. Your full account on record with counsel present. I'll be there, Evelyn said. You'll need to stay in Chicago, Reyes said, until we've confirmed the witness protection arrangements for your contact and established the full scope of your involvement. I'm not going anywhere, Evelyn said. Reyes nodded and moved down the hallway. Hartman waited until she was gone, then stepped closer and said quietly, How are you holding up? Evelyn looked at him. Hartman was the person who knew most of what she had done and most of what it had cost her because he had been watching the process for 3 years and asking questions that most people wouldn't have thought to ask. He was the closest thing she had to a witness to the life she had actually been living. I'm fine, she said, Evelyn. I'm functioning, what she said, which tonight is the same as fine. He accepted that. He knew her well enough to accept that. The deposition is going to be hard, he said, talking about your mother on the record in that context. I know what it's going to be, she said. I've known for a long time. You don't have to carry all of it yourself. She looked at him. James, I've been carrying it by myself since I was 17 years old. I think I know how to carry it. He was quiet for a moment. You did something extraordinary tonight, he said. I want you to hear that from someone who watched you do it." She didn't know what to say to that. She looked at the floor and then back up at him and, "We haven't finished yet," she said. "Don't say things like that until we finished." "Understood," he said. He went back through the office door. She stood in the hallway for a moment, alone, truly alone for the first time since she'd walked into the Meridian 9 hours ago, and she let herself feel it. Not all of it. She couldn't feel all of it yet, and there was no safe place to put it if she did. But enough. The edge of it, the fact that the night had happened the way she had planned, and also completely differently from how she had planned, and both of those things were true at the same time, and she was still standing. She pushed off of the wall and went back into the main room of the club. Victor was where she'd left him, seated elbows on knees. He looked up when she came in. Frank Caruso was in a chair across from him. The other men had drifted to the perimeter of the space in the way they always drifted when there was nothing specific to respond to. The fireproof box was gone, Hartman had it. The legal pad with Daniel's statement was gone. What remained was the room and the people in it, and the particular exhausted quiet of a night that has finished doing what it came to do. "Stokes's lawyer is moving to suppress the ledger," she said. Victor made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "He'll lose that motion." "Yes," she said, "he will." She sat down in the chair across from him, the one Frank had vacated without being asked. "Reyes wants your cooperation on the deposition, your account of the ledger's chain of custody and the circumstances under which you provided it." "I'll cooperate," Victor said. "There is also going to be scrutiny of the cooperation agreement itself," she said. "Stokes's people are going to argue it was coerced, that Hartman leveraged the trafficking charges to force a deal you wouldn't have accepted otherwise." "Hartman didn't leverage anything," Victor said. "I called him." "I know," she said. "You'll need to say that, clearly, on record." "I'll say it," he said. She looked at him. "There's something else." He waited. "The documentation of the warehouse," she said. "When it enters the formal record, when my mother's death becomes part of the evidentiary chain, it's going to be public. It's going to be in the news. People are going to know what happened to her and why and who was involved." "Yes," Victor said. "Frank was there," she said. Frank Caruso, standing near the back wall, straightened slightly but didn't speak. "I know," Victor said. "Hartman is going to want his statement too," she said. "About that night, about what he saw and what he did and what he didn't do." "I know," Victor said again. He looked at Frank. Frank. Frank came forward. He stood in front of them both with the look of a man who had been deciding something for the last several hours and had finally decided it. "I'll give the statement," he said. "Whatever Hartman needs, the full account." Evelyn looked at him. "It means criminal exposure for you," she said. "You understand that." "I understand it," Frank said. "I'm 73 years old. I've had 30 years more than your mother got. I understand it." She held his gaze for a moment. There was nothing to forgive, she had told him that, and she had meant it, not as absolution, but as a simple statement of what was and wasn't within her capacity tonight. But there was something in looking at a man who had been present at the worst moment of her life and was now choosing at the end of his own to tell the truth about it. Something that didn't have a simple name. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. Victor said, "There's something I haven't told either of you." He said it in the particular tone of someone who has been holding something back, not out of deception, but out of waiting for the right moment, and has finally determined the right moment has arrived. Evelyn looked at him. "The documents your mother had with her," he said, "the papers she was carrying when they found her at the warehouse. Daniel said they were taken and destroyed. That's what he told me 20 years ago, and that's what I believed." "Yes," she said. 2 years ago, Victor said, "Daniel brought me a piece of business, an acquisition, a storage unit in Bridgeport that belonged to a man who owed a debt and had defaulted. Standard arrangement debt, cleared, contents transferred. I sent someone to inventory the unit." He paused. In the unit, there was a sealed box. Inside the box were documents: financial records, property transfer chains, corporate registration filings. I didn't look at them carefully at the time. I had them cataloged and stored because I store everything. Evelyn had gone very still. "When I moved the ledger 8 months ago," Victor said, "I went through everything in my secure storage, including that box." He looked at her directly. "The documents in it were your mother's, Evelyn. Daniel didn't destroy them. He kept them. For 20 years, he kept them, probably as leverage, probably as insurance against the day someone asked him questions he didn't want to answer. He never used them, and he never destroyed them, so there they sat. She said, "What was in them?" "Everything," Victor said quietly. "A full paper trail tracing 6 of Stokes' shell companies through a series of real estate transactions going back 18 years. Handwritten notes in the margins, your mother's handwriting, I assume. Commentary on what each transaction meant. Questions she hadn't answered yet. Names circled." He paused. She was 3 weeks away, maybe less, from having enough to take to someone who could act on it. The weight of that settled on Evelyn like something physical. Her mother had not been a casualty of proximity. She had not stumbled into the edge of something by accident. She had been doing exactly what Evelyn had spent 20 years doing, building a case document by document, name by name, following the money through the layers of protection that men like Stokes built around themselves. She had been doing it alone, with no Hartman, no Victor, no 20 years of preparation. She had been doing it as a paralegal in a small real estate firm on her own time for reasons that Evelyn could only begin to imagine and would spend the rest of her life trying to fully understand. She had been 3 weeks away, and someone had told Stokes. "Where are the documents now?" Evelyn said. Her voice was completely steady. She had made a decision somewhere in the last 30 seconds that this information was not going to break her open. Not here. Not tonight. It was going into the box with everything else, and the box was going somewhere very secure inside of her, and she was going to take it out when she was alone, and it was quiet, and she had the capacity to actually feel it. "In the ledger box," Victor said, "with everything else. Hartman has them." She nodded once. "He'll know what they are when he opens it." "Yes," Victor said. "I made sure they were clearly separated and labeled." She looked at him. "You've known for 8 months." "Yes." "And you waited." "I didn't know what I was waiting for," he said. "I didn't know who was going to walk through my door. But I knew something was going to resolve eventually, and I wanted whoever it was to have everything when it did." "You could have gone to Hartman yourself," she said. "I could have," he said, "but I didn't trust the process without someone inside it who had a reason to see it through that went beyond professional ambition." He paused. "Your mother had that reason. You inherited it. I needed you in the room." Evelyn looked at the man across from her, the man she had spent 20 years casting as a villain in the story of her life, the man who had turned out to be something considerably more complicated and considerably more human, and she felt something shift in the architecture of the narrative she had been carrying. Not absolution, not warmth, but a recalibration, a recognition that the world was more intricate than the story she had needed it to be when she was 17 and running through an alley with nothing but a photograph, and that the intricacy didn't diminish what had happened, didn't excuse what had been done, but did change what justice actually looked like. Justice wasn't what she had imagined at 17. It was this room, these people, this slow and grinding and imperfect machinery of truth moving forward. Her phone rang. "Hartman," she answered. "I opened the box," he said. His voice had a quality she hadn't heard from him before, something between shock and controlled elation, the voice of a man who has just found something he stuck to letting himself believe he would ever find. "Evelyn," the documents in the interior sleeve. "I know what they are," she said. A pause. "Your mother," he said. "Yes. She built essentially the same case you built," he said, 18 years ago, from a completely different angle with completely different resources. And she got to Evelyn. She got it farther than, the shell company chain she traced goes 3 layers deeper than what you had. There are names in her notes that we don't have anywhere else." "How much does it change the case?" she said. "It doesn't change the strength of it," he said. "The case was already strong, but the names in her notes, there are 2 federal judges in this state whose names appear in her records as beneficial owners of one of Stokes' shell companies. That's not peripheral to the case. That's the reason the national security order got signed on tonight. That's who Stokes called." Victor said Hartman. He was close enough to hear. "Which judges?" Hartman said the names. Frank Caruso sat down very suddenly in the nearest chair. Victor said nothing. His expression did something that Evelyn had not seen it do all night. It went somewhere inward, somewhere private, somewhere that had to do with the particular discovery of learning that the corruption you thought you understood goes deeper than you thought, down into the places that are supposed to hold things up. "The national security order is invalid," Evelyn said. "It's tainted," Hartman said. "A judge with a financial interest in the outcome signing an order that protects that outcome, that's not a legal order. That's obstruction. which means the terminal records are not actually sealed, which means everything is available, she said. Yes, he said. Reyes is already making calls. By 8 o'clock this morning, every record at the Calumet terminal is back in play legally with a clean chain of custody and no suppression argument that holds. Stokes just lost the one card that might have saved him. She said, he's going to try to run. He already tried, Hartman said. His passport was flagged 40 minutes ago. He's in his home in Kenilworth. Federal agents are outside. Evelyn closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. When she opened them, the room was the same. The people in it were the same. But the ground underneath all of it had just finished settling into something permanent and real. What do you need from me right now? She said. Nothing, Hartman said. Go somewhere and sit down. I'll call you at 8. He hung up. Victor looked at her. She looked at Victor. It's done, she said. Tell me, he said. She told him. All of it, the judges, the invalid order, the terminal records, unsealed the passport flag, the federal agents outside Stokes' house. She said it in the same careful, sequential way she said everything, because even now, even at 5:47 in the morning, at the end of the longest night of her life, she was a person who organized information before she released it. When she finished, Victor leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. Frank Caruso pressed his hands flat on his knees and breathed slowly. The room held what it was holding. Then Victor said, Your mother built the foundation. Yes, Evelyn said, and you built the house. She didn't answer immediately. She thought about Margaret Blake and her handwritten notes in the margins, and her circled names and the questions she hadn't gotten to answer yet. She thought about a sealed box sitting in a storage unit in Bridgeport for 20 years, surviving the man who should have destroyed it, because even Daniel Cross, in whatever complicated corner of whatever passed for his conscience, hadn't been able to bring himself to finish the job completely. We built it together, Evelyn said. She just didn't know we were building it together. Victor looked at her. He had the look of a man who has arrived somewhere he didn't expect to arrive and is taking a moment to understand where he is. What happens to you now, he said. Deposition in 48 hours, she said. Witness coordination. Probably 6 months of federal proceedings, maybe longer, depending on how Stokes' legal team decides to play it. After that, she stopped. She hadn't let herself think much beyond after that. After that had always felt like a country she'd heard about but never been to. I don't know, she said. I've been pointed at this for so long, I'm not sure I remember what pointing at something else feels like. You'll figure it out, Victor said. You're good at building things. You can build something new. She looked at him. Is that what you're going to do? I'm going to start by calling my daughter, he said, in Denver. And I'm going to tell her I'd like to come out sometime and meet her kids in person instead of through a screen. He paused. She has 2, a girl and a boy. I've never been in the same room with them. Evelyn said nothing. That's a specific kind of damage, he said. What you build when you build the wrong thing. It takes other things with it, things you didn't mean to take. I know, she said. I know you know, he said. You lost 20 years. My mother lost more, she said. I try to keep that in order. Victor nodded. He stood up from the chair. He was a tall man and he moved with the careful deliberateness of someone who has learned that deliberate movement is itself a form of authority. And even now at the end of this night, the authority was there. Not the same authority it had been 12 hours ago. Not the authority of a man who had never been questioned, but something different, something earned differently. He held out his hand. She looked at it for a moment. Then she shook it. Not warmly, not coldly. The way you shake the hand of someone you have come through something with, when coming through it together, doesn't make you allies exactly, but does make you something that doesn't have a simpler word. I'll be at the deposition, he said. Whatever day Hartman sets, I'll be there. I know, she said. He let go of her hand. He looked at Frank. Frank stood up. They moved toward the exit together, 2 men who had spent 4 decades in the same world and were about to spend whatever came next in something different, something that didn't have the old shape, something that was going to have to be figured out one day at a time. At the door, Victor stopped. He didn't turn around. He said it to the space in front of him. For what it's worth, he said, she would have been proud of you, not because you finished what she started, but because of how you did it. He paused. She raised someone who walked into the most dangerous room in Chicago and told the truth out loud. That's not nothing, Evelyn. She didn't answer. She waited until the door closed behind them. Then she sat down at the bar, the same bar where she had stood 6 hours ago, and answered a question wrong on purpose, and started the collapse of something that had stood for 20 years, and she put her hands flat on the mahogany surface and she breathed. She thought about her mother. Not about the warehouse, not about the documents, not about what she'd known and how close she'd gotten. Just about the woman, her hands the way she'd held a coffee cup, the sound of her voice in the mornings. The photograph Evelyn had grabbed on her way out of the alley, the one she had carried in every jacket she'd owned for 20 years. She took it out now from the inside pocket of the jacket she was wearing, and she set it on the bar and looked at it. Margaret Blake looked back at her, 41 years old, alive, not knowing what was coming, but working quietly in her off hours in the margins of a job nobody paid her enough to do, following the money through the layers of protection that powerful men built around themselves. Fighting something she probably knew was bigger than her, with tools that were probably not equal to the fight, because someone had to, because someone always has to. Evelyn put the photograph back in her pocket. She took out her phone and she called a number she had been carrying for 20 years, a therapist in a city she had lived in briefly under a different name, who had helped her build the box and taught her how to use it, who had told her once that the hardest part of surviving something was learning how to live after the surviving was done. The phone rang 3 times. The therapist answered. She was awake. She'd been awake for a while. "It's me," Evelyn said. "I know," the therapist said. "I've been waiting for this call." "It's done," Evelyn said, and on a pause. A long, warm, uncomplicated pause. "Then come home," the therapist said. "Wherever home is now. Come home and we'll figure out the rest." Evelyn looked at the bar, at the empty glasses, at the room that had held everything the night required of it and was now just a room again. "Okay," she said. Outside, the city was finding its first gray light. The streets were waking up. Somewhere in Kenilworth, Gerald Stokes was watching federal agents walk up his driveway for the last time as a free man. Somewhere in Denver, a woman named Maria was going to get a phone call this morning from her father, and the distance between them was going to start getting smaller. And in a back office of a federal building, a man named Hartman was opening a fireproof box and finding inside it the work of 2 women across 20 years, the mother who found the thread and the daughter who pulled it, until the whole thing unraveled, and understanding that justice, when it finally arrives, almost never looks like anyone imagined it would. Evelyn Blake walked out of the Meridian into the early morning light of a city that didn't yet know what it had become overnight. She had walked in as a ghost. She walked out as herself. And that after 20 years of becoming someone else in order to survive, turned out to be the most radical thing she had ever done.